Hey guys, Tom Barclay here at Tottenham's training ground. It's been a while since I've done one of these because of the international break when I was working covering England. But I am back for a video after Ange Postecoglou's pre-West Ham press conference in which he talked about having to effectively stew on that Brighton defeat for a couple of weeks over the international break, but lots of other interesting things covered. So let's get into it. I think actually one of the most interesting things, and I'm going to start with it, is his comments on Richarlison. So Richarlison's obviously had a tough time at Tottenham since he signed from Everton for 60 million, mainly through injuries, obviously struggled for goals on the pitch. And he is someone that a few weeks ago, when we were asking about a fitness update for him, given he's had this problem with a calf, we were actually told by Ange to stop asking about him because it was going to be such a long time off. But obviously earlier this week it was revealed that he's back in training and back in contention. So he was asked a bit more about Richarlison, and he talked about the fact that they've taken their time with him. They've really trying to build up his fitness. So the fact that he actually recovered from his injury a couple of weeks ago, but they wanted to take him, be really, really cautious and really work on his fitness, because I get the sense this is a player who's had so many injuries, so many problems at Spurs, that they want to try and really, the lawnmower's next to me here, hopefully you can still hear me, as on these training pictures. Yeah, so Richarlison, Ange even talks about it himself, that he's a player that's often broken down. They're trying to get to the source of the problem, trying to stop it from happening, to give him a real chance of making it here at Spurs. So that's why they're being extra cautious with him. He even talks about the fact that he's really trimmed down Richarlison and looks really lean, which is quite eye-catching to hear that, because I think of Richarlison when you sort of look at him as being one of the leanest players out there. He's quite a sinewy player. He's not like doesn't ever look like he's really carrying any particular extra weight, but that was something that Ange said, which really sort of made me sort of sit up and take notice about Richarlison. So perhaps maybe that's part of it. I don't know, but you get the sense that with him that he's someone that I think it's fair to say there are question marks over whether he really has the physical capacity to handle this intense style that Ange wants. I mean, Ange talks about how he wants Spurs to be the most intense team in the league, and it's just some players just can't handle it. And the fact that Richarlison keeps getting injured makes you wonder if he can. But it looks like Tottenham are really trying to get to the root of the problem once and for all and sort him out. So I thought that was interesting. It'll be fascinating to see if he gets any minutes at West Ham at the weekend as a result. But good to see him back. From one South American to another, in fact, from one Brazilian to an Argentinian, Cristian Romero. The questions about him and his performances this season, really, because Romero is one of Ange's big leaders. He's often talked about what an outstanding player and character he is. He's obviously one of the vice captains, but there have been question marks over some of his performances, some of his lapses and mistakes that have led to goals this season. I can think of Arsenal, for example. And he's always very supportive of Romero for understandable reasons, but he's also quite an honest guy as a manager, as managers go. And he did say, he's had some good moments, but he's had some disappointing moments that Romero in particular has not been happy with at all, with those tough moments. So it sounds like Romero's the kind of player who's going to be kind of beating himself up a bit about some of the mistakes he's made. But I think it is fair to say that some of the Spurs fans have become frustrated at times. Obviously think he's a great player and want to see him be the long-term solution of sense of that. There's no question marks over that. It's just some of these mistakes that he's made in this season have been a bit too many, really, a few too many this season. So that was why he was a talking point. He's obviously come back quite late from international duty. I think he played late Wednesday night. I remember the last international break he was having a bit of a not directly a moan. It was retweeting a journalist who was suggesting that a lack of Tottenham paying for a flight home was part of the issue of tiredness in the North London derby. But this time, he's come back late because of Brazil playing quite late. But apparently, there's no issues, physically with him, with Bissouma or Sarr, the three players who returned the latest out of all the international players. He actually, on team news, he talked about Lucas Bergvall having a niggle that he's picked up on in Swedish duty, but he, like all the other players, have trained today, so there should be no problem with him. which actually leads to the interesting debate over which players he might leave out off the bench. Suddenly Tottenham's squad is looking very, very strong. We'll come on to that a bit later. In terms of another returning player, we already knew that Sonny was back in training. The captain did feel like they lacked leaders at Brighton actually, so that's a welcome return for their skipper. And Ange talked about how he's good to go. He's had a really good solid week of training. He's obviously got into a missed international break. We all know what a patriot, I suppose, Heung-min is for South Korea, so it would have been gutting for him to miss out on those games, but he is ready for this match, and I think it's the kind of player, the kind of influential player that Tottenham really need at this point. He was asked about, as I said from the top, asked about Brighton. He had these quotes earlier this week about being ready to sort of explode at the players after sort of stewing on that defeat for a couple of weeks. That was actually how the press conference started, about whether had he exploded, which he made a sort of quip about, not literally exploding, obviously. Such is the way with Ange, to be honest. He's often quite disarming and quite funny in these pre-match press conferences, a little less, not serious, but just not as less tetchy and less sort of, I don't know, game face. And in these ones, he can be a bit more relaxed and can come up with some quite funny lines. So that was part of it. But he said, he gave players feedback, and one of the things that they've really sort of ruminated on over these last couple of weeks is just how passive the team were, in particular that 20-minute spell in the second half, trying to get to the root of the problem. In fact, he actually was really interesting on that, but that was in the embargoed section. So I may do a video later. I forgot time to sort of talk a bit about that. I was asking some questions, as was some of my other colleagues, about just why it was so bad, and he had some specific reasons behind it, which I found quite interesting. So maybe I'll do a video on that later. But in the open section, he talked about how it being a really good lesson for, if you're off it in the Premier League, even for a moment, you can get punished, and that's what's happened with Spurs with that Brighton game, which was a real sort of mood killer going into the international break. He's also asked about Ryan Mason, one of his coaches, which is quite an interesting little story over the international break, that he was in conversations with Anderlecht over potentially taking over there. He obviously didn't in the end, and we just asked a bit about what the situation was with that. Postecoglou said there wasn't actually too much in that, but he talked about his role of wanting to develop coaches at Tottenham, and it's not like desperate for them to leave, but it's his role to bring them on, and if they do want to move on to other opportunities at certain points, they're not going to stand. He's not going to stand in their way, as we've seen with the likes of Chris Davies. Mason's an interesting situation, isn't it? Because he's been interim manager here before, was named on the coaching staff under Postecoglou, but it was actually Matt Wells who got the step up to assistant when Davies left, rather than Mason, which is interesting given the fact that Wells actually assisted Mason during those interim stints after Mourinho and specifically after Conte left. So you do still get the sense that he wants to be a manager, definitely long term. So whilst it hasn't happened here, it does feel like it will do eventually, and that's something that Postecoglou I presume would have no issue with. He just said that he told Ryan he just didn't want it to be long and drawn out, and it sounds like Mason quite quickly came to the conclusion that he wanted to stay. Postecoglou said that he's very happy and committed. So I imagine, as I said, this will come up again at some point, that a club will come in for Mason, but he will eventually go. But for now, he's staying put. And actually, I was going to come onto this a bit later, but maybe that's quite relevant to this other topic. So he was asked quite a lot about the England manager situation, obviously with Thomas Tuchel being a foreigner taking the job, and Postecoglou having been a former national manager with Australia himself. And he had quite a few interesting points, but just specifically on the idea of going abroad as a manager and learning from that. He was, as you'd expect, massively sort of evangelical about that and the benefits of doing that and learning new experiences. Him himself having done that in Japan, where had to have all his press conferences and team talks rather translated, and the growth, which is obviously a word that he uses a lot, that came from that stint, and obviously being in England and Scotland as well, and just what you can gain from it. He just really feels that's a good idea, particularly for young English managers. So you wonder if Mason, all right, Anderlecht, it didn't work out this time, but if something like that were to come up in the future, maybe that would be a good shout. Just on the England manager, he talked about how outstanding a manager Tuchel is. He did speak about the fact that when you are from the country that you're managing, as was the case for him when he was managing Australia, it just weighs on you heavier than it would be if you were a foreign manager. Sort of almost suggesting that, you know, the baggage that comes with, I suppose, letting your own country down if it goes wrong, being harder to deal with than if you were an outsider, so to speak, which was a sort of fresh take on what's been a big talking point this week, with Tuchel being named England manager, which, you know, I could go on about. It's sort of quite a strange situation with England this last couple of weeks, covering them up in Finland. Really recommend to Helsinki, anyone who hasn't been there, or if they're thinking of going there, fantastic city. But obviously poor Lee Carsley, I think, you know, based on what England have said afterwards, knew throughout that you know, Tuchel was coming in before even the Greece game, so he was tying himself up in knots over questions from people like myself over whether he wanted the job permanently or not. He must have known already that he wasn't going to get it. But anyway, that's England conversation. Let's stick to Tottenham. Just one further point about that is, you know, people have pointed out the fact that there are only 3 English managers in the Premier League, but Ange kind of went down a route that I always subscribe to, really, on this. When people talk about, you know, lack of English players playing in the Premier League, people always talk about there need to be more English players, more English players. And I do sort of get that. I suppose the uptake in English players has correlated with English relative success over the last 8 years under Gareth Southgate. But for me, if there are if the level overall, whether it be through English players or foreign players, goes up because clubs are bringing in the best and brightest from around the world of football, then the English players that do make it will be better for it. So I don't know, maybe it's a chicken and egg situation. But anyway, this is the point that basically Postecoglou made with coaches, let alone players in the Premier League, and how if, yes, there may be fewer of them, but the ones that are succeeding, the likes of Eddie Howe, there'll be a higher quality manager than if there was, I don't know, a quota brought in for amount of English managers, or more of a focus on it, because it's competing against literally the best in the world, because if this is supposed to be the best league in the world. And I'm on board with that, but I mean, I guess that's each their own on how they feel about that. You know, back to Tottenham, you know, obviously after Brighton, that 3-2 defeat, as I said in the video afterwards, it was the ultimate Spursy performance, as much as Tottenham fans hate to hear that. You know, 10th time they've in the league have thrown a 2-goal lead away, and it was unsurprising that that tag came up again. And he was asked about that tag, and he said, you know, in classic Ange, he was like, "Who cares? It's irrelevant." And it's not really fair on him to have a go, because it's not like it's the 10th time it's happened to him. It's just, is it? I'm not sure if it is the first, but it will be at least only one, not 10 times it's happened to him. So it's not really relevant. But as he said, the only way to change these perceptions and these names that Tottenham get called is to change perceptions with your performances. So that's one of the things he said. Jed Spence, obviously this week, has signed a new contract, which is some turnaround for a young player who talked about his backstory before, signed from Middlesbrough, instantly branded a club signing by Conte, didn't seem to want him, didn't really play him, went on loan to Leeds, had his loan cut short because of what seems to be an attitude problem with Daniel Farke, went on loan to Genoa. They didn't take up a permanent option to sign him, looked to be going nowhere, looked to be definitely heading out, at least on loan again at Spurs, but has had a serious turnaround to the point where he's actually signed a new contract. And Ange talked about the fact that when he came back, this summer, he could have easily just come back into the building, expected to head straight back out on loan, but came back with a real determination to make it here. And that was picked up by the coaches. His attitude, which has been called into question before, was great, was the quote that Ange said. He said he's a good footballer, and he talked about how a lot of players often feel like their fate is in other people's hands, i.e. the manager, over what happens to them, but it's actually not the case. And Jed Spence is a living proof of that, I suppose, is his point of how he's managed to change his own course by knuckling down, which was another phrase that he used, and how now the challenge is for him he's got a name on the roster, as he put it, and he's part of the squad. Now it's up to him to take it on further from that and become a key player under Ange. So that's Spence's next challenge. I also asked about the fact that they apparently haven't had a single long goal kick this season. I haven't done the maths. This was Jay Harris from The Athletic asking about this, but I'll take his word for it. Ange himself wasn't quite sure whether it was literally none, or at least publicly he was saying he wasn't quite sure. But just pointed out, as you'd expect, it's part of how they play, trying to sort of manipulate the opposition and lull them into areas where they can beat the press. But that was an interesting point that I hadn't even thought of. And then just finally on to West Ham. He said he understood the rivalry a lot. This is obviously, Arsenal's the one that most people focus on, Chelsea as well, but West Ham is a huge part of this rivalry between the two clubs. He said that, like I say, he completely understood how strong that feeling is between the two clubs, how much it matters to Spurs fans to win, and the fact that Ange has actually never beaten West Ham. It's his first ever game. I remember being in Perth in a friendly when they lost to David Moyes' West Ham, and last season they didn't beat them either. Talked about, I think it was the game at home where they ended up losing. Well, they actually played really, really well. It was during that spell where it was all going a little bit results-wise, a bit wonky, despite the performances being good, as opposed to towards the end of the season when the results and the performances were going a bit wonky. But now they've got Lopetegui in charge. They're trying a different way of playing. He's got a lot of respect for Lopetegui, as he always has respect for every manager, but respects the sort of jobs that he's had in the past, and talks about it being a real challenge for them. I mean, so to sort of round up on the West Ham game, like I say this every week, it's like rinse and repeat. I might as well just copy and paste my last bit of video about the importance of this game and how significant it seems. But once again, I mean, it's like every game they've got. I don't know if it's the fact that the situation they're in at the moment and the sort of doubts over Ange's style long term, but I don't know if it's just that or it's the nature of the opposition. But every game seems like make or break. Like West Ham at home is a tricky fixture that Spurs have had issues with in the past. As I've just referenced, the strength of feeling with the fans is huge. But if you go and win a game like that and win it convincingly, it can really kickstart things. And I thought we were on the road to that before, and then they go and lose like they did at Brighton, which sort of throws everything into doubt. And as my good friend Dan Kirkpatrick of The Standard said on our podcast, The Tottenham Way, him and Tom Molnar at the time, so I really recommend you check it out if you get a chance. It was a really good analysis of where Spurs are at the moment. But Dan talked about the fact that it was such a vibe killer, mood killer, that game, which left you questioning all of those 5 wins beforehand and, reassessing how impressive they were, or if they not didn't get lucky, but did get lucky in certain situations. Definitely Coventry. You said Coventry was just a poor game; they just got away with it. But games like Ferencváros, Karabag, the amount of chances they gave up, and it made you go, well, I'm not quite sure if it's quite as convincing as we thought it was before, through the sort of lens of the manner of the Brighton defeat. So, West Ham again, you go and lose that at home, then it's the questions and the knives, I guess, will be out again. But you go and win it convincingly, like I guess Brentford a few weeks ago, definitely like Man United, and it's all positive again. I mean, I'm sure he's desperate just to get to this stage where the questions over the style will calm down, and he can have a bit more of a sort of smoother ride. And perhaps part of the problem has been this, stuttering start to the season, not just from results, but just the way it goes with international breaks, breaking it up every time. But I don't know. It seems a big game. West Ham have got some quality players. They've had a pretty terrible start to the season, to be honest, in terms of adapting from Moyes to Lopetegui. But they convincingly won last time out. Jared Bowen's a player with a lot to prove after being left out of the England squad. We know what a quality player he is. I mean, what a player he would have been for Tottenham. West Ham did really well to get him, and they've got loads of other talented players as well. So there's a lot of threats they have to worry about. But Spurs have got, like I say, a pretty strong squad now. If the likes of Son, Richarlison, I don't know how fit they are, ready to start. It sounds like Son is ready to start. Richarlison, you imagine, would be slowly brought back in, just as Ange said, with this recovery. So I imagine looking at the team, you're going to think it's obviously the back four picks itself, as always. Vicario, Porro, Romero, Van de Ven and Udogie, although Udogie really needs to have an improved performance after his shocker of the second half against Brighton. So maybe a bit of pressure on him, particularly with Spence signing a new contract. I mean, he is the overwhelming first choice at left back, Udogie, but I guess you put in a few more performances like that, if Spence really impresses off the bench and picks it up in training like it sounds like he has, then there could be less of an obvious. Could have more competition on his hands than you might think, the Italian. But you're expecting a response from him. You'd think Bentancur, unless he was looking to change it up after Brighton, Maddison, Kulusevski, so I guess there's a chance of Basuma, but I think Bentancur is actually, for the most part, that midfield's worked really, really well, bar in the second half, over the last sort of however many games. Sort of talked ad nauseum about how brilliant Kulusevski has been in that number 10 role, but also Maddison, very unlucky to lose out in England. I would probably stick with that. And then Son back on the left. Werner obviously got an assist against Brighton. He did threaten with his pace, which Son doesn't really have so much anymore. But lack of conviction, that phrase that Ange uses so much, is no more relevant there. It's relevant to no other player more than it is to Timo Werner. So I think Son comes back in there, Solanke through the middle, and obviously Brennan Johnson on the right. It's quite a relatively easy team to pick. But now with options on the bench, or even more options with Richarlison, presume if you want to bring him on, Bergvall sounds like he's fit, Sarr coming back. Will Werner even be on the bench? Might be Mikey Moore. That would be a real sort of show of faith of his talents if he goes for him. But they've got players back. Odegaard doesn't seem too far away as well. So if Spurs go and win at home to West Ham, then that could be the turning point. But as I say, this team has just been so many turning points this season that you can't really take anything for granted. Just finally, so I may do a video later on the stuff that you said in the embargo section, because it's quite interesting and quite an insight. I'm actually away for the next 10 days on holiday during half term, so I won't be at the game tomorrow. I'll miss a few of the games actually, but I'm back for the Man City game, so you won't really see anything on here for a while. But hopefully you will stick with me, keep the faith, and hopefully come Man City at home in the League Cup, Spurs have a few wins behind them, and we'll have a fascinating League Cup game to discuss post-match after that, and we'll go from there. Anyway, that's me signing off for now, and I'll speak to you soon.